All right, today we're going to have a little conversation with Jeremy Ring, who's running for CFO, and just trying to get to know him a little bit better. Jeremy, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Okay, what is your background?
Well, first again, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you today. I am Jeremy Ring. I'm a former state senator and I'm a current candidate for Chief Financial Officer. My background is a little unique from most people that had been kind of going into politics. I didn't certainly grow up or get my start or even go to law school thinking, like a lot of other people do, that they're going to get involved in public service. I was actually part of the team that helped build Yahoo. In 1996, early 96, I was 25 years old. I was living in New York and we opened the East Coast office of Yahoo out of my apartment, and I was the first salesperson hired worldwide by the company. We were a very small company then, probably 2 dozen or so employees, and I then moved to California after helping to build a New York office, and we built one of the great iconic companies in history. We were worth over $120 billion in market capitalization. We changed the world. We pioneered the digital information world, and I always say every morning we woke up and said, how am I going to change the world today? And we did. So it was a pretty impressive story and a very impressive run. 2001, I moved to Florida to start a company called Collegiate Images, where we were the rights holders to all the universities in America, their sports libraries, kind of like the NFL films for college, and we exited and sold that company in 2008. I started a charity called Superb, which stands for Students United with Parents and Educators to Resolve Bullying, School Bullying. It's an 8-week program, and over 50,000 Floridians, middle school students, have been through our program. I spent several years working for a large mid-market private equity firm, and I was a state senator for 10 years. And during that time, I accomplished quite a bit, including being chair of the Government Oversight Committee, which had kind of the legislative oversight of the Florida retirement system.
What drove you to go into politics? Because, let's face it, you're a successful entrepreneur. You didn't need the headaches. What made you do that?
Fortunately, it hasn't been headaches. It's actually been more fun than headaches. But when I moved to Florida, I was not politically active. I hadn't even voted, which I can say because it's always come out in all my campaigns. But coming out of Yahoo and seeing Google being built and seeing how eBay was built and all these companies in a really small, tight radius, I came to Yahoo in Florida, and while I saw a lot of innovation, I didn't see, especially out of our universities, I didn't see the mindset and the state on how to commercialize those innovations. We didn't have an innovation economy. I wanted to bring Silicon Valley to Florida, and so I actually ran for office with that thesis. How do I bring Silicon Valley to Florida? How do we create an innovation economy in the state?
Weren't you even successful in passing some legislation that involved with technology?
So there were three pieces of legislation which I authored, which I'm actually most proud of. To build an innovation economy, it's just that you have to build an economy. There are lots of parts of the ecosystem that are required from innovation, inception, all the way to the lifespan of a business. And so the first thing I did is I created something called the Florida Institute of Commercialization, which is the largest technology incubator in the state. It's based in Gainesville. We have about 75 technology companies in our portfolio that were startups out of universities that we've taken and now commercialized and taken to market. I created the Florida Opportunity Fund, which is based in Winter Park, Florida, and it's a $100 million venture capital fund for kind of early institutional capital that will go to technology companies. And then I'm the founder of what's called the Florida Growth Fund, which is a $1 billion late-stage venture capital fund based in Miami, which invests in technology companies in Florida. And all of them together have had several $1 billion of economic impact. Thousands and thousands of jobs have been created from these businesses, and average salary is 75,000 plus.
Yeah, these are great jobs with benefits that really drive the economy of Florida.
I think I really believe I've done more to drive the technology economy, the innovation economy, and new great jobs for the state than anyone in the Florida legislature in the last 10 years, because I created the incubator, the opportunity fund, and the growth fund.
All right, well, tell me a little bit about your campaign.
Well, I'm running for a seat called the Chief Financial Officer of Florida. Very few people know Chief Financial Officer even exists as an elected office in the state. Most people that come from different states are familiar with state treasurer, state controller, but for whatever reason, Florida decided they would call the title of the position Chief Financial Officer. So it's a very hard seat to run for, because the first thing you have to do is you have to convince people the seat exists and then what the seat does. Someone who's running for governor, for example, they're the product. They have to sell themselves. You don't have to tell someone what the governor does. You have to tell them what you're going to do as governor. Here, where the candidate's supposed to be the product, I have to tell them what the CFO does before I can actually say what I would do as the Chief Financial Officer. But it's an incredibly important position. Florida has 4 statewide elected offices: the governor, the attorney general, the chief financial officer, and the commissioner of agriculture. Each elected, their own constitutional office, each with several thousand people in their offices that report up to them, and all equal and exclusive to one another. Chief financial officer, for example, does not report to the governor. This is called the statewide cabinet. Think of it as the statewide board of directors. There are 2 separate kinds of responsibilities. There's responsibilities specific to the chief financial officer, and there are responsibilities the chief financial officer has as part of the statewide cabinet, again, the statewide board of directors. Clearly, the chief financial officer's main role is to pay the bills of the state of Florida. But in addition, the chief financial officer is the insurance commissioner, reports up to the chief financial officer and the governor, which is so all property insurance, workers' compensation insurance, everything like that would be under the chief financial officer. It's the regulator, essentially, of our insurance markets in the state. So that alone is a critical position. It has probably the largest IT responsibilities, just to have a whole statewide financial management system, beneath it in the Department of Financial Services. Most people don't know it's a state fire marshal, which is mission critical, obviously, to the state. It's got huge responsibilities as a cabinet level position. It's one of 4 votes on the clemency committee. It's one of 4 votes for state land buys.
Explain what clemency is about.
Clemency is just the restoration of rights. If you have been charged and found guilty of any sort of felony, the state of Florida takes your rights to vote away. The clemency committee hopefully works to restore those rights after you've served out your entire sentence. But it's the position has all the state land buys would be under the cabinet. Citing power plants and nuclear plants is one of 4 votes from the cabinet. You've got a number of agencies such as the Department of Motor Vehicles, Department of Veteran Affairs are all cabinet level positions. Office of Financial Services comes under the cabinet. And then along with the governor and the attorney general, the chief financial officer is one of 3 trustees to the Florida retirement system, which is a $160 billion investment fund with over 600,000 beneficiaries into the fund. And in addition, the chief financial officer is the sole trustee to the state treasury fund. So it's overall, you're a trustee to about $200 billion of investment capital, which people tend to not overlook. But I would clearly, as a trustee, you cannot overlook that position.
No, you mentioned overseeing insurance. Is that even involving enforcement, dealing with fraud, stuff like that?
Well, that's all within that. Okay. So certainly fraud. The chief financial officer doesn't author bills, vote on bills, veto bills, or sign bills. Chief financial officer is an administrator. It's a regulator. It's got enforcement abilities. And certainly the legislature makes the laws to try to limit fraud, although you can never truly limit fraud. It's up to the chief financial officer to enforce those laws and get as much of the fraud out of the system as possible.
So based on the fact that the other 3 cabinet member positions, CFO is involved in a tremendous amount.
Well, CFO touches every dollar in the state of Florida. So there are thousands and thousands. Just imagine the amount of contracts that the state has with vendors. Okay? The CFO is in charge of paying every bill. What does that mean? Legislature appropriates money, governor spends money, CFO pays the bill. It's the last line of defense. It has the ability to audit every single contract and make sure that every agreement was actually executed precisely as the agreement was written. If not, the CFO can hold the money back. CFO can find fraud in any contract, investigative abilities. CFO could, in an $85 billion budget, who's to say the CFO can't claw back over $1 billion
Wow.
if the contract hasn't been executed properly? So people don't realize how important it is to be that last line of defense to the taxpayer dollar.
Now, in the past, do you think there's opportunities that a CFO should have stepped in and done something, or you think everything's been going?
Well, that's a good question. I think we have an $85 billion budget. It is unreasonable to believe that all $85 billion has been spent with contracts that have been executed exactly to the letter. It's absolutely unreasonable. But because there's not a lot of auditing that's been done, I don't know, and no one else can tell me really where the money has been wasted. So the answer is yes, you would think it would have to have been the case, but nobody really knows, because I don't think the state has done enough of auditing our agreements to really determine that.
What would you like to accomplish as CFO?
CFO, as far as I'm concerned, there's three legs of the stool that I see as mission critical to this position. Number one is, I said, it's got the biggest IT enterprise oversight in the state.
Let's start that part over again, because I don't want you to have you scratching your head.
Okay.
So, ready? What would you like to accomplish as CFO?
There are three legs of the stool, as far as I can see, related to the chief financial officer. There's a lot of roles, but where I will take the office is three core missions. Number one, it's got the largest IT enterprise responsibility in the state. The state has appropriated several $100 million in the past few years to create an entire new financial management system for the state. This system has to be built with someone who has an understanding of how to build such a vast enterprise. And look to build modules for the future. We talked about auditing a moment ago. And, in the past, auditing has always been how many bodies can you put in it. But there's obviously technology solutions today, and they're getting better and better and better to do smart contracting, smart auditing. All that has to be included in the new system. And then there needs to be a proper transition from the old system to the new system so everybody can get paid. Number two is, again, the property insurance and the insurance aspect of the role. We need to modernize the way we think about insurance. The state thinks about, the legislature always thinks about insurance from the standpoint of rates, which are fine. We want to keep rates affordable for our policyholders and our taxpayers, and I understand that. But what we've done is this legislature has artificially kept those rates low, and they've put massive amount of risk on the other side, on the shoulders of every policyholder in the state. I think we need to look at how do we modernize our whole financial system and risk management into our property insurance market. So we create products, we put the risk into the marketplace, therefore we're creating a very healthy industry, and therefore competition is going to drive rates. So I think we have to look at our insurance in a whole different kind of 2018 mindset versus 2006 mindset. And then lastly, I talked about is the innovation economy. Being a trustee to almost $200 billion worth of investment capital, first, second, third, fourth, fifth priority is making sure we have a strong return for the beneficiaries. But is there a way to leverage the dollars to help economic development in the state to create an innovation economy while getting a great return? Right now, the Florida retirement system has to get about a 7.5% internal rate of return annually. Florida Growth Fund, for example, which uses $1 billion of retirement system money in order to invest in technology companies in Florida, has over a 12% return. So there's a great track record there of leveraging the capital in the retirement system, or at least a small portion of it, to help build innovation, drive an innovation economy in the state, while ensuring, again, most importantly, a strong return to the beneficiaries. So just to rehash, the three legs of the stool are, the financial management system, the IT aspect of the state, modernizing our kind of insurance, property insurance environment, and kind of risk transfer and risk management. And number three is to help create that innovation economy in the state.
All right, let's talk a little bit about partisanship, and do you think that this has become a partisan type race?
All campaigns are partisan, even when they're considered nonpartisan. That's the way our country is, and it's unfortunate because there should be nothing partisan about paying the bills of the state of Florida. Nobody's going to look and say, I won't pay your bill if you're a Democrat or Republican. Firefighters don't look when they're saving someone and say, are you a Democrat or Republican? It's absolutely insanity to me when we think, if anyone thinks of the chief financial officer in a partisan way. I understand thinking about a legislature and a governor that way, but nothing that the chief financial officer does is really a mindset of, are you Democrat or Republican? It's an administrative role where your qualification is far more important than it is if you're a state legislator. You can be a state legislator and chair judiciary committee and never have been an attorney, for example. But when you have your hands on $85 billion treasury, and you have responsibility to make sure hundreds of thousands of individuals in the state, hardworking people, get paid, every month, you can't be worried about partisanship, at that point. And you can't be worried about is it a Democrat or Republican. It's an administrative role. It's a regulatory role. And make sure government is run effectively. So, no, I don't see the partisanship in that aspect of it at all.
All right, talk about who's supporting you.
Well, I've been fortunate, and a lot of people are supporting, but I want to point to one group, the state workers. So I have this endorsement of the Firefighters of Florida, which makes it kind of interesting because it's a fire marshal position, but putting that aside, firefighters, the police officers, the teachers of the state, and all the other state workers under the unions. Why is that important? It's important because it means they trust me with their money. As one of 3 trustees to the Florida retirement system, $160 billion, the chief financial officer, I said before, it doesn't author bills, vote on bills, sign bills, or veto bills. Okay? It is not a policy level position. The position helps the state workers because it is the position that has the trustee fiduciary oversight of their retirement. So by getting supported by all those groups, it means they trust me with their money. And I can't imagine a greater responsibility than having that trust that they've given me to make sure I protect their retirement.
Let's talk a little bit about what it's like to run a statewide campaign and even your family life. How does all that get impacted?
The more you do it, the more it becomes kind of a second fiddle. And that what we do is we're on the road several days a week. We start in South Florida. We may be Orlando, Tampa, Jacksonville, wherever it may be. But what I try to do most nights, not every night, but most nights, is I try to sleep in my own bed. I try to get home every night. And I think that's made it bearable. A lot of hours in the car. Obviously, we'll catch a plane if we can, but for the most part, 90% of our travel is on the road because it's the way our schedule works. So as long as I make it home every night, it becomes bearable in terms of balancing it. So we can start the morning in South Florida. We can be in Tampa for a later morning. We can be along I-4 corridor. We can be in Orlando later in the day. We can come back down to Palm Beach for dinner and then be home. And that's not uncommon, but at least we're home. And by the way, we'll start the next day we'll probably do a very similar loop. Or maybe we'll go up to Jacksonville and back for the day. We may spend 5 to 10 hours a day in the car, but at least we get to balance it by coming home at night.
So as we're wrapping up, the citizens of the state of Florida place great trust in you. Why should they trust you?
Well, I can talk qualifications and have that rhetoric going, all day long. The truth of the matter is that the workers of the state who get paid by the state, make sure they get their paychecks, and as well as having their retirement managed effectively, have all endorsed me. Okay? That endorsement of those individuals, those hundreds of thousands of individuals in the state of Florida, is why the rest of Florida should trust me. Because if those individuals say, we trust you with our money, there's not a bigger stamp of approval that I can possibly imagine getting. And that's why I think the rest of the state should trust me as well.
One last question. Your entrepreneurial background, do you see that as really preparing you for the state of Florida CFO position?
Thank you for asking the question. I'm not sure if people can remember back to the 90s. It was a ways ago. There used to actually be something, I don't know if people ever heard, they were called newspapers and dictionaries and all kinds of things that we used to have until we kind of changed the world of Yahoo. But what people forget is for 21 quarters, okay, from 1996 to 2001, I was one of the leaders of the highest profile publicly traded company in the world. That's serious pressure. That's Wall Street pressure. That's pressure of having your retirement 401k plans all over the world invested with us. So yeah, I would think that experience alone qualifies me to be Chief Financial Officer of Florida.
All right, Jeremy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.